said, and I had talked to Tricia yesterday about this. I said, this is something that I never would have, I mean, not that I wouldn't have felt comfortable with it, but it wasn't something that I would have been jumping out to do,
Wasn't top of your list?
No, not at all.
Capacity.
But I've actually come to have fun doing it. Hopefully the two of you don't put a damper on that today.
Well, they said they got you to relax a little bit so you didn't have to have storyboarded out beforehand and everything.
Well, I am that kind of person. Right. I like to make sure that I have my ready to go. I'm a very, from my previous job, is very detail oriented to make sure that we have this step, ready to rock and roll so that, when you trip or fall or whatever, what comes next.
Right.
So, I mean, that's just me. And I'd like to do a little bit of research before so that when you all hunker down and get me some,
Question 4.
When the audience comes up with a whole bunch
the
of
question,
really good
and
stuff,
that's really what's been,
keeping going.
nice is that as we've progressed in doing this, the folks who have been tuning in have been able to, ask some questions or be engaged in one way or the other. So that's been good too. And like I said last week, we need to share that out to our friends. It's like that old shampoo commercial, right? If you tell one person and they tell one person and they tell two people and, and so on, hypothetically we'll have 1 million people watching.
Yeah, it's kind of like replication of a virus.
Too soon.
Too soon, okay, all right.
So yeah, that's, like I said, I've been having fun doing it, and I think with inserting different people into it will get us, a different perspective, and also maybe, empower somebody else that wants to do it.
If they see us and we don't mess up too much,
Probably.
maybe somebody else will want to join in. I think that'd be great.
I think one thing that we need to make sure that the director has that hook.
Yeah.
So
Can't go too far.
We don't have a Sandman? Well,
you can find one.
there's probably a little less inquisition this week since Tori's not here.
Well, Tori always challenges me on certain things, so,
She is challenging.
Yeah.
She's
In a good way.
fantastic. I really like Tori and her perspective on things. I think
Well,
it's great.
for both Tori and Belinda, our prayers are with them today. So,
Absolutely.
I paid the person that Tori's seeing a little extra money to kind of.
You got to grease the wheels a little bit.
Sometimes that's the way it works.
I'm sure she'll do fine.
Yeah, I'm sure she will too. And, I don't need a sweater today. I'm not cold. This is just the way I
Well,
sit.
that's what I was going between. Should I wear lederhosen or a sweater?
It is a mic cool in
Temperature
here.
check.
I
not
did
really.
turn the temp down because it was 77 in here when I got
It was
here.
comfortable for me. Okay, so now we're down to freezing temperature. Okay.
Well, see, I normally got to worry about like on Sunday when I'm wearing, an
Extra
alb and
layers,
whatever, and
yeah.
I'm just like,
Okay.
The magical notes.
Yes.
I
Does that
think
mean we
I think it's
start?
12 o'clock. The bells are tolling.
See, who needs a producer to cue you?
That's right.
Just let the Caroline do it.
Oh, hi,
Wow.
producer.
Wow, the
Whatever.
newbies are in here tormenting the director already. That could be a short-lived.
We might not have an
you know,
appearance again, Russ.
Sometimes
Be
you
careful.
got to burn the bridges on the way in.
Way in and out.
I would never do that. Come on.
So today, I'd like to welcome my new compatriots, Deb Horton and Russ Mildenstein, who are here to kind of fill in for my usual cohorts, and we'll see whether or not they're worthy to stay in that chair another time. But for now, we'll see how that goes. Today, we are testing 100% our new technology for live streaming. So if you are watching, please, 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 please let us know if you can't hear, if you can't see it, or if there's some other difficulty that you might be having, so that we can figure out how to correct it before we go live with this in church in 2 weeks. So we need your input, please.
I just have one small comment. I should have looked into the camera area prior to us starting, because when I put my head up here to look, I look right into the lights, and it's pretty blinding.
Well, yeah, sometimes it
Good to
is,
know,
but
because I'm so short. My
no, the lights are in my eyes too.
Are they?
But
Well,
I've
look at
but
those
I
nice
but I've
soft
come nice soft ones.
Yeah, those are soft compared to those babies. Those are bright whites.
So today we're talking about the 9th and 10th commandments, and the key word behind that is covet. So in Luther's explanation of this commandment, it was not so much as taking, but not stealing, because that's covered under the 7th commandment. It was
Right.
more of
A wanting to.
a
have
wanting to
something.
have it,
Right.
but taking it by means that would be legal. So
Kind of figuring out a way to do a bad thing or an incorrect thing, but do it in a legal way.
right, I mean, you're still going to be depriving, your
Neighbor.
neighbor of whatever, and Luther uses the example of divorce, because that was actually a contract back in the day, where if you weren't happy with your spouse, and back in the day it was your wife, that you could just write up a piece of paper and say, this, and that, here you go, we're good, and move on.
You're out of here.
You're out of here, right, basically. So that's kind of where Luther was going with it. It's really, Luther was looking at, taking away from us in this, the desire for us to harm our neighbor, but to assist in not doing harm. We're supposed to gladly accept what our neighbors have, and bless them with those gifts, and to honor them, although honor was a bad word last week, I think.
I don't think we're going to dig that deep into your
Keep,
word.
Okay, good.
Keep that integrity going. We wanted to
integrity,
keep
yeah.
that integrity going, yeah.
So that's really what I think Luther was getting at in this. It was that we're not to deprive, and Deb had sent me a question earlier. Did you bring your question?
I did not, but I kind of remember it.
Okay.
If I can, yeah. My question had to do with our situation in our culture, which is really very much a market-driven culture that says, you will consume as much as you can, and if somebody else has something, then you should want it. Kind of like what you ran into with your chipper experience
Right.
today. Which he can explain later. But I wondered, do we really set ourselves and other people up to break this commandment by having that kind of intensive market-driven and marketing-driven? And I know I participate in it. I see something I want and I'll go, ooh. Or I see something that somebody else has, and I think, I'd like to have that. Now, I don't necessarily take it from them. That would be stealing. But I want to get it.
But there are methods by which you might be able to obtain it.
Yeah.
It's like me driving to work. I have this huge pile of brush in my backyard that I need to get rid of. So as I was driving up here to church today, there were 2 tree trucks driving by that had a chipper on the back, and I was like, boy, I really need that. But, I didn't obviously go and hook my truck up to the back and pull it off. But then to your question, Deb, I mentioned back to you, the concept of eminent domain.
Yeah.
Where I'm living in the path of a freeway that is supposed to come through, and the government decides that we need your property.
Yep. And
You
there
know,
it
granted,
goes.
they're going to pay for it, but it's still, I think, along of what Luther thought of as, yes, you can legally do that, but is that putting you out of your house?
And is it the right thing to do? I got the intent from Luther that, you know, he talks about everybody gets as much as you can, and then we kind of let everybody else go to, too bad for them, you know, good for me, too bad for you. But we'll also begrudge other people having more than we have.
Sure.
And that, to Luther, at least that's the way I was reading this, he said, we brazenly even dare to boast about it, and we insist that it should be called shrewdness and business acumen.
Right, but you know, I'm conflicted in this commandment
Aren't we always?
well, with all the commandments really
Have a lot
think
more to
about it,
them,
you know. But you know, you look at, like, I'm a big fan of log cabins, and I you know, watch the crazy shows on, like,
Cabin Masters.
Nat Geo or whatever, that have these, you know, huge log cabins, ones that, you know, have an elevator for your motorhome to go down into the basement and whatnot. And I go, wow, I'd really like to have that. But, you know, is that really coveting, where I'm wrangling my way to get it? No, I think it's desire.
Well, there's sort of a fine line between appreciation for something and coveting, and it's a super thin line.
Yeah.
Because you can appreciate something and say that would be awesome to have, but if you're not, you know, single-mindedly, I need to get that, you know, however I can figure out to do
Right,
it.
you're 4 inches over on my property line, so I can, you know,
Right.
that kind of thing.
That might be the exception. I think that might be okay. But the other thing with, you know, if you're so focused on coveting something, getting something, you're going to not have focus for the other things that you're supposed to be doing.
Right.
Like the giving and the,
And again,
your time
you know,
and things.
having joy for you for having that. You know, I think that's where Luther really says of what you're supposed to do, is that you're supposed to laud or be grateful that you have that and lift that up. You know, so that's,
That one challenges me a little bit, because it almost says that's okay for you all to not have things, but I get to have things. I think that's I think that's one we have to, you know, pull apart and kind of look at a
I
little
think
bit.
that's a little bit different than coveting, though. You know, the have and have nots. I don't know.
I mean, it's,
I don't know, but I think it's worth
you know,
thinking about.
there's a lot of other places where, you know, it's okay to have stuff. It's if you make that stuff priority is where you run into the problem, where my stuff is the thing that matters the most to me.
But you have to use that stuff in the way the commandments and the way Jesus taught was that use your things for the betterment of
Right.
others.
Right.
You know, as opposed to, you know, the old Elmer Fudd, it's mine, 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 mine. I'm a millionaire, you know, I own a mansion and a yacht. No, that's not what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be, if you can do goodwill towards other, then you do goodwill towards others.
And if you're so into your coveting of things and acquiring that you will do anything to get it.
That's,
No
I think,
then
the
that's
key
another
here.
piece that he really
Well, that was one
focused
thing
on.
that when I was doing a little bit of research, that I found that I hadn't really thought about is when somebody says the Ten Commandments, a lot of times you immediately go to the adultery, murder, these things. But this is probably the most insidious because it can lead you down the path of breaking all of them real
Sure.
easy.
Right.
You know, because it can lead to all these other things. And I hadn't really thought about that. And I was like, so, you know, not that one's bigger than the other, but this one is probably a little more trouble because it can lead into a lot of other things.
Yeah, it's got threads that can go through every single one
Right.
of them. Because you can worship and adore your goods because you've coveted them so much, and now you get something, and now you put it over top of your God.
Right.
You
right,
know,
right.
I mean, you can even go that far with it. So you can go
Right.
all the way back to number one
Exactly.
and thread it through. So it's a bigger,
Maybe that's why it's 10.
Well,
9 and 10.
Well, 9 and 10.
9
depending on
and
who you
10.
talk
I mean,
In our count.
Nine is, I think 9 is your neighbor's wife, which kind of fits the same thing. You're not, you don't, you want to lift them up, and you want to make, if they have a happy marriage, you shouldn't be, inserting yourself to make it not that, so that you can think you're going to have happiness.
Right.
They're a tricky one. It really is.
They
Really,
all
They're
are.
all tricky. They're all a lot more than I think a lot of people try to say, oh, well, I just follow the law. I just follow the commandments and everything's good.
But
Are you really?
But
Yeah.
but as we found out when we started talking about thou shalt not kill,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot more to it than just the physical act of murder.
Yeah.
It's your thought process behind it and how you actually come to that, and not just the actual act, but it's how your anger manifests and how you get to the point.
And it could
of-
be your words, too. You could murder with your words.
Absolutely. I mean, there
Well,
have
then
been
you go into
people
that false witness stuff,
that
too.
are quick to that, right?
Yeah.
Yes, Madam Director.
Question from Belinda.
Oh.
What about coveting others' gifts, such as covet another's singing voice or covet another's speaking ability?
I think that fits right in there. It's something.
Good point.
I mean, granted, that would be very hard for you to take from somebody, but I mean, what was the story? The Gift of the Magi, where the woman loved her hair so much, and she had that great hairbrush and whatever, and then her husband needed something. I don't remember the full story, but they ended up giving away the things that they loved so much because they loved and then what they loved about each other was what they had given away.
But that's essentially the opposite of coveting.
Yeah. Yeah. He sold his pocket watch and she got him a chain for it, I believe was what
Yeah.
it was.
But yeah, as far as is it admiration, or do you really want to be able to take that from somebody? I don't know.
Well, and would you do something to make it possible for them to suffer harm so that they can't exercise
I think
their...
that's exactly what this,
Yeah.
so that they, okay, I'm the first, for lack of a better term, I'm the first soprano in the choir. Now I'm the second soprano.
Yeah,
You
it's not as good.
And
Little
I've
black
heard
swan.
and I've heard it often that boy, we really love Trisha's singing.
So glad she's here.
Hey, do I wish that I had Trisha's voice? No, not necessarily.
I
but
think you'd sound funny
You
if you
think
sang
so?
in her voice. Yeah, I think that would be just kind of hilarious.
But I think you have the same thing. Is that the scenario where you're walking down the street with the first and second soprano, and the second soprano trips the first soprano? Oops, sorry, and then you.
There you go.
Is that what we're talking about here? So that I can now I bump myself up in the choir.
There actually have been murder mysteries written about that kind of thing.
Sure.
Because somebody is so covetous
Covetous.
of that other person's position that they do something hateful and they end up getting the job or the
Or whatever,
position or
or-
whatever it was. Yeah.
Whatever happens.
Tanya Harding.
Oh, there
Tanya
you
Harding,
go.
right,
Yep.
absolutely.
Go for the knees, that's, yikes. Yeah, that's bad stuff.
Right.
But we all like to think we would never think such a thing or we would never do such a thing, but
But we all do.
we all do it.
Right.
And then we try to say, oh, but it was a
I would never
special
do that.
situation in that case, And I think Luther even comments on that. He says, look, well, and I hate to always be, Marianne, forgive me, those lawyers that will twist and stretch the law to suit their purpose.
Well, that's exactly where Luther was, though,
Yeah.
in his thing. He was really into, how the law is able to be perverted legally
Yeah.
to make things happen,
Right. It's a good thing that never happens these days.
No, it doesn't,
ever.
not at all.
We've learned a lot over the years.
Those inheritances sometimes come to mind, don't they?
Right.
Right.
Well, other thing that I saw that I thought was kind of interesting, I meant to write down the person's name, so credit, no name, I guess. But they were saying how they were going into a thing about positive coveting, which I thought was odd. They're like, if you're coveting the right things in like God essentially, or the positive things you're supposed to be doing, and if you're coveting them, and I think they were more on the lines of you're single-mindedly going for this thing with all your heart and effort, which I thought was sort of an odd.
But so I've often thought this myself, and I don't know whether it's coveting or whether it's a desire for a stronger relationship. But when you rub the lamp and the genie comes out and grants you 3 wishes, I mean, one of my wishes is that I would have a better understanding of what Christ was talking about. Is that covetous? I don't know. But to me, it's a good thing because I really want to know.
Well, I think it depends on how you handle it. If you're doing negative things to make that happen, then...
Well, I would
But
always
how
wish
could
for
you?
that extra wish.
Right,
Too.
exactly.
Okay.
I think that's usually addendum 1.
Would you bribe the genie? There's the thing, give me the extra wish,
Really, Jeannie, I want 100 wishes,
Yeah, right.
and then get started.
The list just gets longer and
Why not?
longer.
That never works out well, though.
I don't think so. No.
I did sit there and think about, I was trying to think of the things that I've coveted over the years, that stood out. And I don't think I do it very much anymore. I don't know. I've got other things on my mind most of the time. But I was like, in high school and middle school, I feel like that is prime coveting time.
Coveting
You
things.
know?
I want what
It's
Jimmy
like
has.
82 silver RX-7 and a pair of Magic Johnson purple and gold Converse high tops. And I was like, those just popped in my head. I was like, you know what? I could still do both of those at the same time.
At the same
Magic
time.
Johnson purple sneakers, huh? The
Absolutely.
Nikes.
They were cool. That was our school colors, too.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah.
Well, then that's okay.
It's okay then. But,
And an- and
other
an
people had those
RX-7.
things. I was like, man, I really want that. That would be
Yeah.
so awesome.
I really want a 65 Mustang, but
Oh, wow.
never get it.
They were,
Oh, you could have
they
that,
were
though.
great
it's hard to find.
and not cheap.
No, not
I
cheap.
happened
Not
to,
cheap.
oddly enough, I went on Bring a Trailer, and there was an 82 RX-7 sitting right there.
Nice.
But, it's still a little pricey. I think it's the same price it was in 1982 right now.
Any more questions from the peanut gallery out there?
Tell us your favorite thing to covet.
Like I said, I am a fan of wanting to be able to live in a log cabin by a lake in the mountains, and my convertible Mustang
With
outside.
your convertible Mustang.
I
But
like that idea, except for when I need something from the store.
You just drive your Mustang down to the store and you'd be
The store
fine.
isn't
Yeah, no
close,
problem.
though.
yeah, not where I would want to be. No, I mean that's really. I mean, is that really coveting, or is that a dream? Or is that a
Right.
Is that a wish?
Dream has been shot down.
What's that?
A certain wife has said, yeah, that's not happening.
Yeah, I know that.
So you can continue to dream, but that's as far
If
as
you don't mind it being a little rusty and maybe have a
Oh,
knock or
no.
two.
I've already got a boat in the garage, so I think that's the end of my toys.
Oh,
Yeah, she says not the park.
You could probably trade out of that and get rid of the boat.
Oh no!
Well, what you need an amphicar.
A what?
An amphicar. It's a boat and a car.
Oh,
Just
that's
drive it
right.
in the water.
Yeah,
okay. Amphibious car.
Just solving problems.
me and Maxwell Smart.
Exactly. Okay, this is devolved.
Now this I hadn't looked at this one, but I looked over it quickly, I guess. These commandments, Luther says, are directed especially against envy and miserable covetousness. So maybe the dream of something, as long as you're not going to be
Well, I
hurting
think-
people to get what you're hoping for.
I think that's the key.
Yeah.
The key that Luther has is that you're not hurting the person or stuff and trying to scheme to take it away from them.
Yeah.
No matter it's you can still look at it and say, hey, I really love that, and I would love to have one myself, and that's where it ends. But you take the next step where you figure out you act to do something to find a way to get that away from them. That's really where we go.
Yeah, and I
wrong.
think the moving on part and not constantly focusing on it either, because I do think it addresses the thinking of it all the time, as well as, then what happens. But, he says you can't, it's a commandment that constantly accuses us and just shows us just how upright we really are in God's sight, which is not very, not upright. So, yeah.
Right.
He had a real interesting way of putting it right out there in your face, So-
And that's a lot of what Luther is.
Yeah.
Luther was a very, this is the way it is, this is the way it goes, this is what has to happen to you, as opposed to, and then he digs into that and says, this is how you should, to kind of give us those instructions.
Yep.
That's all you're bringing?
Man, I tell you what. Well,
You got 10.
10 more minutes?
10.
Oh,
Okay.
We got number 10 to get to.
oh, they're kind of the
So
same.
the 9 and 10 are the
Is
same.
it basically the same thing? Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
We still got 11
well,
through
do you want to
15.
go into business people anymore?
Well, I got a question for you.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a little broader. So, we've gone through the 10 Commandments and everything like that. And, obviously, we break them all every day. And, well,
Not-
to a point. To a point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we are sinners and saints.
Right. Okay, so if you look at the Bible and you look at Old Testament, New Testament, New Testament, we are under a new covenant, where the Old Testament stuff, it's relevant, but we don't go by the law specifically. So where do you kind of,
So that's, if you look at it, Old Testament is really the law.
right,
New Testament is the gospel. So the law is what what governs us. The gospel is what gives us the grace. It's
Okay.
what gives us our forgiveness, gives us our, like you said, a new covenant with God to be able to move on in the world from when Christ was sacrificed on the cross. Christ was a new beginning, and that's where the New Testament comes in. Is okay, we're starting over. Here we go. Let's talk about the good news instead of let's be mired in these laws. And in the Old Testament it was severe.
Right.
There's a lot of severity of Leviticus.
Yeah, the
was,
laws were a whole big
Oh, yeah.
deal that were serious. I mean, and if you didn't follow them, you could be put to death.
Right.
Not just spiritually dying, but you would also lose your life
Right.
at that
and,
point
and
in
that's
time.
that's where the New
So-
Testament comes in and gives us hope and forgiveness and love for what we experienced with the death of Christ and what we experience with the death of Christ every day, because we remember that, and that's the root of our love.
And didn't Christ also share with us an even greater commandment, which kind of encompasses everything?
To love one another as I have loved you.
Right, and to love God with all your whole soul.
right. And I had a little bit of a conversation with someone yesterday about that. They had mentioned they're not a church person, and they had mentioned something about in an offhand way, didn't Jesus have something to say about that? And he about being nice to each other. And I said, really, the one thing if you get out of all of it is be nice to your neighbors
Be kind.
and be kind. And you're sort of, the rest of it is great and important, but if you get that alone, you're
You're
doing
good.
pretty well.
Yeah, and that, that's the thing that we have to, what was it, 2 or 3 weeks ago, where Jesus is first sending out the disciples, and he says, if you go and you speak my message and you speak love or you speak kindness and you're welcomed, great, stay there and continue to do that work. But if you're not, shake off the dust, which was an Old Testament type of thing. where you kind of showed your disdain or displeasure without necessarily saying the words of offense, and you moved on, which is kind of how I believe you should do it. I'm not the in-your-face kind of, evangelist that,
Well, that's hard to do too.
It is, but I think it's one of those things where I come to you or you and say, this is what I have to offer. You either take it in or you don't. But then if you do, great. But if you don't, at some point I'm going to swing back around like a boomerang and I'm going to offer it to you again. And hopefully, not being offensive about it and not being, you need to do this, but still offering that opportunity allows that entrance for Christ in your life.
And by your actions of how you are and who you are with them,
Right.
they may see it's such an attractive thing that they inquire even more about
Right.
it,
And I think that's really what has been such a positive thing with our online stuff, is that we've been able to connect with people who, for whatever reason, haven't been able to come in the doors of a church or, whatever. And there's nothing to be said against that. But we've been able to reach out and give the goodness of Christ, God's love, to whoever will accept it.
Well, and I think it speaks to our mission so much, because it's not just within the congregation, which we hope and pray that we are doing, but also within the community and to the larger world. We have accessed the larger world this way than we would have ever had the ability to do before.
Sure,
Well, that's going to be one of the blessings of this. There's always, you don't
It's a
look,
silver
you don't have to
lining.
look
Yeah.
far to find the negatives,
Right.
but the positives. People are having to really get creative in different ways to do things, which, improves areas a lot that you wouldn't have thought they would.
I mean, granted, I'm new here, but you as, parishioners long time here, would you have ever thought that folks from Texas, North Carolina, Florida, wherever, South Korea, would be joining you for worship?
No, I think it's fantastic. I really do.
And that you could, work in church or do your church thing at home on the couch in your shorts.
I haven't
That's
been
my
able
fa-
to
I
do
have
that
tell you,
yet.
He
I
kinda has
enjoy
a
just lay on the
time
couch,
taking
watch
that.
church. Go to
Maybe
the
next
bulletin.
council meeting I'll try that.
We'll get a stand-in for you, a cutout. His mouth moves.
I'll just put a picture up over it and be like, But yeah, and that's been the beauty of it. And I think St. Paul's has adapted to that very quickly. And yes, have there been bumps along the road? Absolutely. But we've learned from that, and that's part of how we grow. You learn and you fall and you pick yourself up and you make it work.
Yeah, make it work. So.
Absolutely. Good job, St. Paul's.
Good job, St. Paul's.
Any other points you
Anything
wanted
from the
to
peanut gallery?
make? Any other comments, questions?
No, I've asked for, as a wrap up to the commandments, if anyone had any last questions or comments, and so far nothing.
Do you want to do that little bit of, that Luther did at the end there, where he kind of talks about how this all holds everything together? You remember that part.
Sure.
Conclusions. It's a summary of divine teaching and all we are to do to make our whole life pleasing to God. And then, he says, basically, we're going to have our hands full trying to keep these things
Sure.
and making this happen. And in our interactions with others, it's going to be so important to always have these as kind of the network or the handiwork that we hang everything that we do on.
But I think it goes back to exactly what Russ says. It's as simple as being kind. It's simple as offering that cup of water. It's how can you be generous to somebody else? Can you give someone a morsel of food? Can you just say, thank you for being here today?
Yeah. Well, like
You
you
know?
said, I mean, if we are loving each other, if we're loving God, this is our relationship with God, it's our relationship with our neighbors, it's our relationship with each other. And if we can do all those things with Christ's presence in us and offer ourselves through all those things that we do, then we'll be meeting these commandments, but we'll also be meeting the greater one, not greater one, but the encompassing one that says, be kind and treat others as even better than you would want to be treated.
But I think, we kind of go back to last week's discussion about the false witness and whatever. And yes, are there going to be times when I don't agree with you or you or you? Absolutely. But in that kindness, in that love, we have that discussion between ourselves, and we don't broadcast it to the world. We figure it out, and then we are able to move on. That's what we need to really do in this world, as opposed to all the backdoor nonsense. I think.
We used to call those parking lot discussions. I think that was one of our favorite things.
Right.
Yeah, you got to not have the parking lot discussion if you're not willing to have the heart to heart with
and the
somebody.
heart to heart. And that's it. Sometimes those heart to hearts are going to be difficult.
Absolutely.
And
See, where I grew up, it was different. We used to go have a conversation behind the barn, but somebody came out.
with a black eye.
Usually.
Yeah. Or
They
with
won
a
the
strap.
argument.
I don't think we want to do that here.
That's probably not where we need to go with it. But like in scouting, they do a good turn daily. You can do the same thing with this in a
Sure.
practical way where, you sort of have to put your mind on it to do one nice thing for somebody. It doesn't have to be big. It could just be saying thank you.
Right.
Or please, or, the kind of very common things.
Right here, let me hold the door for you.
And if
or
you get
whatever.
used to doing one little thing a day, it
Then it
becomes a
builds.
habit, just like everything else. And you won't even have to think about it.
Right.
Except for when driving. You always have to think about it while driving.
Always be careful when driving.
That is my landmine.
So today is our last day for the summer for Gathered at the Table. I think, the people have spoken as to what this will be titled when we come back in the fall.
One thing we do need, I thought, is maybe a theme song. So if anybody feels like, what the heck? Pastor
It's
Beck,
like Car 54, where are you?
Yeah.
Maybe punk rock. I think,
I'm more of a hair band kind of
And we
guy.
can do that.
Oh, wow.
for sure.
That's scary
Get
right
busy,
there.
St. Paul's.
Although Rachel would love it.
So we will be doing some things throughout the month of July for VBS for kids. So that will be in the epistle. It should be in the weekly that went out today. Different things. VBS is also available through the Synod. The sign up is still active until July 12th. So if you have kids that want to participate in those types of things, they're virtual, but still, I've seen some of the pre-stuff for what's being done on the Synod side, and it looks pretty cool. And then Belinda and I have been chatting about what we're going to do for the, mostly Belinda's been telling me what I'm going to do for
That's probably a good idea.
Yeah, Belinda.
for the St. Paul's stuff, and I think we're looking also towards the end or middle of August that for the kids we're gonna try to have a bonfire or something together, spaced out, or
Can we pick which building we have it in?
I think I know which one.
Outdoor?
has
There's
an
two of
idea.
three that I think you're looking at. But we still have tenants in the
I did
one.
not suggest that. So
It's
if anything
outside,
happens, I'm not
outside.
involved.
Wouldn't that fall back into the coveting
A little
thing?
bit. Yeah. I
So-
think you could probably put a couple on that one.
So we're thankful that you have tuned in and joined us, and hopefully you have found this
Helpful.
fulfilling, helpful. While we've done this, we've asked for some questions or topics that you might want to discuss when we come back in September. And my lovely wife has already given me probably one of the hardest ones. That
What's that?
What happens when you die?
Ooh, ooh, okay.
I hope she wasn't leading to something.
Well, I sleep with one eye open, so.
Well, I think the
She's
book of
coveting that new
James would
husband.
be a good one because
Yeah.
that's very practical.
Well, and you know, you would make one of my mentors at Grace very happy because he is a big Book of James fan.
Me too.
So if we do that, I'm sure he will tune in.
Because you don't really have to think through a lot of them because they're pretty straightforward.
Yep.
There's no ambiguity on most of it, which is good.
So,
The questions, well, the only other question was, when are we doing the, what the heck, Pastor Beck?
who said that?
Who do you think? Mike.
She'll get the answer when I get home.
Oh, okay.
I think we talked about starting up the 13th, that week of the 13th or the week of the 20th of September.
September.
Because we've got some things going on the end of August, hopefully. I'm praying. Some little thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we hope. and
Two little things.
pray.
So
We covered those things.
I'm praying for that thing. But that's all we have for today. So thank you again for joining us and happy, safe summer.
See you in September.
Beep, beep, beep. That's all, folks.